So, welcome back to the Heart of America, which is a new YouTube program that's dedicated to looking more deeply at the issues that are affecting the United States of America and actually, the whole world. There are trends in the United States that have spread to other countries, and I think it's important to take a look at those from the lens of both understanding what's happening as best as we can, and also looking at the deeper roots of what's happening, the spiritual, psychological roots of what's happening. And today we have a special guest who's like a reverse guest. Her name is Adey Jones, and she has a program that she runs on her own called Insightful Conversations with Adey Jones. And she interviewed me recently with a woman named Rohini Ross on issues of racism in the United States. Um, and I just thought that was courageous of her. It was a step into, and I think she's also interviewed me on climate change. Did we do an interview? Yeah, on
Yep.
climate change. So um, after the 2020 election and the 2021 insurrection at the US Capitol, um, I started to feel like I wanted to try to synthesize what had happened in the United States. And from my perspective, as someone who had tracked, Donald Trump's rise and election and what was happening over these 4 years, both for people perhaps in other countries and other parts of the world, in Europe and Australia and Asia and elsewhere, Africa, perhaps anyone who wasn't here for the ground level view, and also for those people who are in the United States who just don't understand maybe what all the fuss is about still. I think after the insurrection, a lot more people are paying attention, but there's still a lot of people I think who are a bit confused about what happened here. So Dell has agreed to interview me for this particular show because I wanted to be able to share, and she has some thoughts as well. She's saying she's mostly gonna interview me, but she may have some thoughts about our state of affairs as well. So welcome so much, Dell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for trusting me in
Right?
in in helping guide this conversation.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's very interesting. Obviously, some people can tell I have a slight accent still, even though I've lived here for 40 years. But originally, I'm from the UK, and but having lived here for 40 years, I have seen a massive change. Not that I was that politically involved back in my 20s, I wasn't, but what I've witnessed over the last 4 years, I can only say has been completely turned me upside down. Let's put it that way. I've never witnessed anything like this before in all the time I've lived here. So I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to do it too. It's and for helping to even do the recording and the editing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I would like to, well, first of all, Donald Trump just didn't appear out of, nowhere. There was a lead up to somebody like Donald Trump being elected president of the US, so I'm curious, what do you think led up to that choice? What were the forces that led up to his election?
Um, you know, it's it's interesting because I wasn't paying very much attention to politics up until the 2016 election. And so a lot of this I've learned in hindsight, being really curious about how he got elected after I was impacted personally. My family was impacted and my friends were impacted just right as he got elected. And that's when I started taking a closer look at US politics. But my understanding now is that it's been a combination of kind of a right wing media campaign via Fox News and Breitbart. Um, and Steve Bannon was the head of Breitbart, who was promoting Trump so much on Breitbart. Um, And that started all the way back with Nixon, like at the end of Nixon's presidency when he resigned, you had people like Roger Stone meeting with Rupert Murdoch to talk about how to influence American voters and specifically Republican voters. In fact, there's a memo that Roger Stone, like I think it's actual notes that he took that got released to the public where he says, television has allowed us to just tell people what to think because they're too lazy to read, so they'll just watch television and we can just feed them information. And I want to say that I'm someone who knows a lot about a lot of things now, and I can go deep in some areas, but in a lot of areas I'm sort of surface. So I think people should look into these things themselves if they have any questions or if they want to fact check what I'm saying. There's some things I now know a lot about, like Trump's racism and white supremacist ties, which were what got me kind of really concerned at the outset.
Mhm.
But there's a whole series of decisions around media and fairness in media that happened under Ronald Reagan, where he revoked the fairness doctrine for U.S. news broadcasts, where you had to actually include people from both sides of an issue and try to represent both sides of an issue. That was revoked by Ronald Reagan. So there's been a lot of changes and things happening over time where
Mm.
also Fox News, which is heavily pro-Trump, was, from what I understand, this is something people should look into, was being broadcast in rural America sometimes as the only news channel on a
Wow.
cable within a cable package. So that really influenced, of course, a lot of rural American voters and thinkers.
Mm. Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You said that your family was impacted by it in the beginning. Can you share a little bit about that? What was your personal experience?
Yeah, so when Donald Trump was sort of rising, I didn't know that much about him except he had been on The Apprentice and he had lived in New York, and I didn't know a lot about his background. And
Mhm.
I could actually, I want to say that I'd like to give some airtime to people who support Donald Trump because there are some legitimate issues that I think they they have every right to complain about, and I want to be able to acknowledge those those issues because they're actually issues for all of us, but they somehow got channeled into just support of Donald Trump or just being on the right. And One of them was that Donald Trump, I think, for a lot of people was like refreshing. Like he, a lot of people wouldn't say that, and I wouldn't say that now, but he was someone who would say things that most politicians wouldn't say,
Mhm.
like insulting people, which is not a wonderful thing, but also sort of being honest about some things. And he actually took on, and there's some evidence that he took on Bernie Sanders'
Yes.
message of deconstructing the establishment and taking on the big banks, for example, which a lot of people felt like Obama didn't really do after the financial
Mhm.
crisis of 2008. And I think those are legitimate complaints with our politicians and also our media personalities. I think people are interested in authenticity now. I think they want to hear what people really think. And so Donald Trump sort of busted through all of that. And so I was not sure what to think of him really, and then when the election happened, I started seeing on my social media feed that there were racist incidents happening. Now, what I've learned, I wasn't paying attention then, is that that also happened when Obama was elected. There was a sort of an outburst of racist incidents and
Mm.
swastikas and white supremacist violence or white supremacist, sort of acts, public
Yeah.
acts. And what happened for me was that my cousin, who is half black and half white and lives in Michigan, went to the polls, and she posted this, right after election day, and was harassed by white Trump supporters who called her the N word.
Mm.
And shortly after that, I talked to a friend of mine who is Indian and lives in California in the Bay Area, who was a huge Hillary fan, huge Hillary supporter, very politically involved. And she and her daughter called the Trump campaign on a lark to just to just to poke fun or to see what was going on. And they said, "We
Mhm.
want to make America great again. How can we help?" And they were told to go to the polls and intimidate voters from voting.
Mm.
And, this kind of thing has happened now, we've learned, a lot of us have learned across the South and against particularly Black voters for decades now,
Mhm.
but it was, for me, a shock. I immediately was like, "Okay, this is not okay. This is not about democracy anymore.
Mhm.
This is a different beast, this is a different creature." And, then my friend who's Indian sent me, a video of Donald Trump, and it was a compilation of everything he's ever said about being German, having German blood, and his belief in eugenics and superior genes. Uh,
Mhm.
and he's that video footage is readily available to the general public, and I'm not sure why more people haven't tuned into to that part of him, that he's a believer in eugenics and superior
Mhm.
genes. And all of that sort of combined in my mind as like, this is in 2016, as like, this is unacceptable. We can't have someone like this in office. And that's when I started becoming politically outspoken, because I could sense in him, and I don't know how you felt, it'd be interesting to
Mhm.
hear your thoughts about him when he first got elected, but I could sense, a willingness to allow for any kind of behavior on the part of his followers. And then I was seeing footage of his rallies where you had sort of Nazis and white supremacists
Mhm.
in the crowd, and Donald Trump encouraging violence against journalists, against people who would come into the crowd and protest. You heard him say, "Knock them out," and
Mhm.
really slam journalists. So um, that was what first raised my alarm.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I remember distinctly the coming down the elevator, and I remember one of the first words out of his mouth were, disparaging towards Hispanics and calling them, I won't even repeat what he said here, but I was absolutely in shock, and I just thought, oh my God, he's just that was the nail in the coffin. There's no way he's going to be even. And I think that was that when he was I can't remember if it was just he was just running then, or if it's once he was the nominee. But I just remember thinking, this cannot go any further. We're not going to stand for this. And clearly we stood for it, or half the country did, and stood for a lot more too. So I love, you did an interview, and I think his name was Jay, on your previous Heart of America YouTube. And I love that you really reached. I mean, you tell the story that you wrote a piece on Medium, and he responded, and then you invited him to have a conversation, and that was very admirable as far as I was concerned. What I felt, because previous to this, I've had Republican friends and Democratic friends, and even though I might not agree with policies, I can tolerate different viewpoints very easily. But something happened with Trump for me, and it was really the rise in the white supremacy, that it absolutely fractured. Um, um, I won't use the word relationships, well, possibly working relationships that were impossible after that.
Mhm.
Once I saw people um, going down that track, it just, to me, it was like, how do we even discuss policy when you're talking in racist terms? So I'd love you to talk about, how we come together, how we talk about these things. How was that experience with I think his name was Jay, if I'm correct? How was that experience talking to Jay for you?
Well, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because I talked to Jay and I acknowledged a lot of his concerns that they
Mm,
mostly had to do with the influence of major corporations, and particularly the banks, because he was someone who had been hurt by the housing crisis, the housing sort of loan crisis that we faced in 2008 and the following recession, where he basically lost his business and had to foreclose on his home. He was actually lucky because he was able to stay in his home for like a year under
yeah,
the New Jersey laws. And so we were able to look at Steve Bannon, who was obviously one of Trump's supporters and advisors, and then went to work in the White House for him. Actually worked at Goldman Sachs,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
and Steve Mnuchin, who became the new Treasury Secretary under Trump, also worked at Goldman Sachs, and I believe he worked at the same time that George Soros worked at Goldman Sachs. So what we were seeing together, I hope, was that Trump wasn't draining the swamp. He was talking
mhm,
about draining the swamp, and that's where I think a lot of people have been sort of conned by Trump, believing what he's saying and not understanding that his whole MO across the course of his life history has been, you get to lie as much as you want, in order
mhm,
to get what you want. And that's always been how he's operated. And that was how he operated with Trump University and with the Trump Foundation. Um, Now, what's interesting is we came to some, agreements, and I really appreciated the conversation. But like you, I was uncomfortable too because here's a white man, and
mhm,
when I brought up my issues about white supremacy and racial violence, which we actually know has led to attacks on like the mosque in New Zealand, for example.
mhm,
That mass murderer at the mosque in New Zealand was an Australian who followed Donald Trump and was citing
mhm,
Donald Trump. And the mass shooting at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, was someone who was trying to shoot um, immigrants from Latin America.
mhm,
So um, there, this part can't be downplayed, really, because I don't know how to say this, Dell. Like I want to find the common ground with people, and I'm going to keep trying to do that. But it's really hard when white people, like this white man, I can bring up all this evidence of the terrible harms, right, that are happening
mhm,
to right now. Asian hate crimes are on the rise. I mean, all kinds of things are still happening here in the United States, and it didn't register for him.
mhm,
That wasn't an issue for him. I mean, maybe it sunk in a little, but he didn't say anything. He didn't say, "Oh, yeah, that's bad." He didn't say,
mhm,
and I think that's what a lot of us are waking up to in the United States, is how much racism is baked in, to a lot of people's thinking, whether
mhm,
that's conscious or subconscious. And I think some people would say, "Oh, I'm not a racist," but actually, they have racist thinking that's subconscious or that they don't acknowledge. And so, when we have said, "Well, Trump is a racist," then they'll say, "Oh, well, look, he hired, um, who's the guy? Ben, what's his last name?
oh,
I
yeah, gosh,
wanna
the
say,
doctor, my mind is blanking,
yeah,
Ben,
the neurosurgeon, the black neurosurgeon who's in charge of
yes,
HUD, who was in charge of HUD, or the fact that he met with Kanye West, or,
mhm,
Candace Owens, or, and I see that those all as really token ways for Donald Trump to play to all sides of his base, which he was very good at doing. Like people who don't want to say that they're racist could still support him because they could say, "Oh, look at," um, and gosh, we can't remember his name, but
Ben Carson.
Ben Carson, or look at the woman he had from The Apprentice too, who was Omarosa.
Gosh, yes, Omarosa, that's right,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
who left actually? Who left
yeah,
and has been speaking out against him?
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think a lot of it, and what I recall from the interview was, Jay, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, was very concerned about the economic aspect. And I think certain people, it's like sort of, um, if it doesn't affect me, I don't see it. And I think there's a little bit of that sort of head in the sand as far as what is going on. And I think if we're socially conscious, we can't turn our backs on what's pretty clearly evident from what Trump has said and from the behavior.
Yeah.
So just because you're not impacted directly from it, I don't think is an excuse to just, ignore it and look the other way. So I also wanted to ask you about, you were talking, well, now that we're talking about the sort of underbelly that has surfaced during the last 4 years, I'd love you to touch a little bit on the QAnon and again, the direction that is taking the Republican Party and how that could even happen.
Yeah. So what I've seen in the Republican Party, even with the rise of the Tea Party, and I think even before that, is a willingness to go into a real defamation of character and lying about people. So we saw that with birtherism. I mean, Donald
Mhm.
Trump was, for those of you who may not know, was one of the main champions of trying to discredit Barack Obama as not having been born in the United States and saying he doesn't have a birth certificate, which eventually Barack Obama had to produce. But that was in itself such a, such a way to try to humiliate someone, who was holding public office. I'm just going to tell one story because even
Sure.
before this, I tried to reach out to Republicans that I knew who were friends of mine on Facebook, and I actually did an interview with someone I knew from college who was now at Oracle in a very high position. This was before Trump was elected. And I said, we need to talk because what you're saying on your social media is completely the opposite of what I understand about what's happening in reality.
Mhm.
And so we did have a conversation. But what he had posted that was alarming to me was a meme about Michelle Obama. And she had said at one point, I'm going to take some time off for myself, you know, because I'm just overwhelmed with, as we all get overwhelmed with, she was a mother too, raising two school age children in the White House. All of our activities, and of course, the First Lady has a lot more to do than a lot of other people do. And she was attacked for being selfish and what a bitch she was for taking time for herself. Um, and when I saw that meme, I remember thinking, wow, we've really sort of transcended and passed into a kind of attack that is actually vicious. And my understanding now is that there were attacks on the Obamas when they first got into office as being Muslims, as being um, almost terrorists. And I didn't know that. I wasn't paying attention. So there's a way that I think the GOP has been playing on people's fears
Mhm. Yeah.
about Muslims. I also read a story of a Muslim canvasser in the Midwest or in a red state somewhere, maybe in the South, I don't remember, trying to go to voters' homes and ask them questions and actually try to connect with them, and having people cower in their homes,
Mm.
not even want to open the door. They were so afraid of her as a Muslim.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, something is really going on where this is being, leveraged. This fear is being both amplified and leveraged for political purposes. And that is, when that's happening and people aren't caring about other human beings' lives, um, like Muslims' lives or Black people's lives or, Asian people's lives, uh, then we have a kind of lostness in thinking, a lostness in, from a spiritual perspective, such a grab for power over humanity and over our really common sense and um, love and understanding and compassion that is kind of beyond the pale. And I think that Trump just took all of that, and QAnon is actually a development that I think um, took some of the lies that were already out there that were fomented by Roger Stone, who
Mhm.
worked for Nixon, who has a tattoo of Nixon on his back,
Mm.
uh,
Mhm.
and who has proclaimed himself the dirty trickster, and has said that I lie. I have no problem lying. There's a whole documentary
Mhm.
about Roger Stone where he talks about, I'll do whatever it takes. And he himself is featured in the documentary saying, this is what I do. And yet people believe those lies. And so that habit of lying on the part of the GOP, and I'm not going to say Democrats never lie, but I wasn't seeing this kind of viciousness from Obama towards
Mhm.
the GOP at all. In fact, I felt like he was trying to bring them in under the umbrella as much as he possibly could. Um, and what happened was Q developed, and we've both seen the same documentary about Q,
Mhm.
where it started on these chat boards. Some people were saying it could have just been a joke that someone was trying to play on Trump supporters. Started on, I think, 4chan, and then humped over
Mhm.
Chan, and then 8kun. Um, and interestingly, there's a lot of Japanese porn on these sites, which is strange because
Mhm.
they're so anti-pedophilia, and yet Japanese porn actually is heavily bent towards, like, schoolgirls, that's, like, one of the lead motifs, um, and now, there are people trying to track down who is, Q, and it's
Mhm.
likely this man named Jim Watkins is, at least he's really enabled Q on his platforms because he took over, I believe, 8chan, and then I think he developed 8kun, unless you can double check these facts.
Yeah.
He lives in the Philippines. He's a pig farmer.
Mhm.
He also hosts websites with names like child, love, rape, you know?
Yes.
So I when QAnon first started coming out, I believe in 2017, and it followed on the heels of Pizzagate, the
Yes.
pedophile conspiracy about Hillary Clinton.
Mhm.
I feel like it was like some political operatives like Roger Stone, my guess, were behind Pizzagate. Um, I can't say for sure. And
Mhm.
QAnon picked up on the gullibility they were seeing and the
Mhm.
the capacity that people had to just go ahead and believe these crazy things. Um, and so it became like this perfect storm. And then you had Putin
Mhm.
coming in and also supporting all of that through social media, fake accounts, and troll farms, really supporting Donald Trump in the 2016 election. And that influenced a lot of voters in Michigan, where, the targets were not just right wing Trump supporters, but also Black people.
Mhm.
Black people, it's not worth it to vote because no one really represents you. The targets were also progressives like Bernie supporters, uh,
Mhm.
who, were fed up with the system, so they were funneled to Trump
Mhm.
basically after, it came out that Hillary Clinton, um, there were shenanigans around her trying to keep Bernie from winning in the Democratic primary.
Mhm.
And that's all legitimate, I think, for us to complain about,
Mhm.
also welcome to politics. Like, is this a big surprise? And we should get to the bottom of these things. And we don't need to subscribe to really dehumanizing conspiracy theories that lead to violence, such as we saw in the Capitol, and were leading to violence before that. And I think that for me was the scariest thing, was to see these smear campaigns. You know what I want for people to understand who don't live in the United States about Donald?
Mhm.
To be an Asian person living here, an American person, I was born in Florida. Okay, not that even if I was an immigrant, I would have a complaint because I live here. This is my country.
Mhm.
To have Donald Trump say the Kung flu at his rallies and the Chinese flu as Asian hate crimes are building across the United States, violent hate crimes against Asians. Um, to have your president, the most powerful person in the land, be against you, which is how a lot of Black people felt, and of course, how a lot of Latinx people felt, a lot of Mexican people felt, and a lot of Central American people felt, and also LGBTQ plus people felt. um, is hard to fathom for people who didn't feel that threat.
Mhm.
If that makes sense, like my president is okay with violence against me, and in fact, is saying things that would encourage that violence against me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I saw him feed on people's. I always say he fed on fear and greed. I think a lot of people look the other way because they thought that they were going to sort of benefit financially from having him as a president, and they were prepared to dismiss or what was obvious, what was obviously happening, as you say, breeding contempt, breeding fear, breeding racism, and people just looked the other way because they thought economically it was going to work in their favor. So why bother? And which is tragic to me. I mean, that's not, what I think as human beings we certainly shouldn't be looking in that direction or feeling that way. But certainly as America, which is supposedly the sort of land of the free and immigrants and everything like that. It's such the antithesis to what America stands for.
Yeah.
And yet all of a sudden it became, it's ours and we're going to protect it and we're not going to let anybody else come in and steal from us. So it's really tragic. So
Can I say something about that real quick?
yes, absolutely.
I mean, it seems to me like what we think America stands for is actually different than what a lot of other Americans or people in the United States think
Mhm.
America stands for. And there's been a trend, the other trend that I wanted to point out is the white evangelical church.
I wanted to say that. How on earth can these religious communities
Yeah.
support a man like this? So I'd love to hear your views on how that can happen and why.
Well, the evangelical community didn't used to be actually opposed to abortion. There was a time when they were thought it was a personal choice to make, and I really feel like there's been a manipulation by leaders in the GOP and on the far right, especially because the GOP flipped at a certain point where they started to embrace sort of the racist mentality and brought in the Southern Democrats into the GOP, and that's
Mhm.
why the GOP is now right and it's not the party of Lincoln anymore.
Yeah.
We can say Lincoln was racist too because we're finding that out too. And I think what we're really finding is this tremendous amount of racism, and so for example, like my understanding is that the evangelicals really rallied around school segregation issues at first. And it wasn't even abortion at first that got them politically involved. And they weren't politically involved until it became about desegregating schools.
Mm.
And so somehow the white evangelical church has, you know, continued to foster racism within its ranks. And I'm not a member, but to be honest, a lot of my family is evangelical, and a lot of my family, and these are Asian evangelicals, which is a
Mhm.
different breed. A lot of my family voted for Trump because
Mhm.
there's a whole nother stream of evangelical thinking that has to do with the end times and supporting Israel. Because in the end times, the temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem, and there will be a war in the Middle East, and then the rapture will happen, and everyone will go to heaven, who's a Christian. So that was why you saw the United States under Trump focus so much on relations with Israel and trying to establish peace in Israel because they knew that that's what the evangelical wing of our population really wanted, and they were supporting Trump to the point of it all became kind of mixed together, didn't it? Where it was like the Democrats are pedophiles and satanic child abusers who drink children's blood, um, combined with Trump is going to save us from that, and also Trump has been appointed by God,
Mhm.
is which is something that has been heavily influenced by a group called the Family, which has influenced all of our major political parties. That has this view that whoever is the president, they've been chosen by God, and then they need to be influenced toward sort of the Christian way, into the Christian faith and doing what Christians want them to do. And there's a whole documentary called The Family about this, actually. Um, and this is really frightening when you're living in the United States and you're not religious. I'm not religious. I mean, I believe that there's truth in all religions, and I love people from all religions, and I'm a very spiritual person, as you know. And I believe that really Jesus was about love and understanding. We have this huge section of our society now that is really wants to establish religion within the government and believes that, getting back to uh, these different views of America, that America is really about white Christian rule. And that's, I think, what they've seen in decline as more immigrants come here and more people like me are born, a mixed person,
Mhm.
really the Republicans are starting to be in the minority. And if it weren't for the Electoral College and the makeup of the Senate, which, we now have a Senate where most people are not represented because the GOP, with half the seats, represents like just only a third of the United States, because each state gets two senators, no matter
Mhm.
how many people are in that state.
Yeah.
Um, so you're seeing a lot. I think you're seeing people feeling like they're losing their way of life. They're losing their white Christian way of life. And you're seeing the effects of income disparity, where white people who are used to being on top in this country started to really, I've read articles about this. This is where we can possibly have some compassion, where a lot of these white communities have been devastated with a loss of jobs, and white men who typically have been on top in our society have found themselves, almost at the bottom, where they are unable to get work, or not the kind of work they want, not the kind of money they want. And then, we're seeing an opioid crisis in these areas. We're seeing, poverty and um, reliance on food stamps and welfare, amongst white people.
Mhm.
And I think that that's, it's interesting because Dave Chappelle, Dave
Yes.
Chappelle?
Mhm.
Yeah. He's
Mhm.
been doing some interesting routines, and some people aren't as thrilled with them. But he's saying some interesting things like, white people could learn from black people right now,
Mhm.
because we've been through so much and yet we persevered, to get to even this place, which isn't, fully equal or fully fair. And we actually see white people going into a lot of victimhood, and
Mhm.
everybody else's fault, and I'm not responsible for myself. And coworkers could move, they could go
Mhm.
to other cities and find other jobs. But there's this reluctance, especially in the older generations,
Yeah.
of feeling like I deserve this, I deserve to have my life be the same as it ever was.
Mhm. Yeah, it feels very short-sighted. I mean, we know that, there are industries that are, they're dinosaurs. They are dying, and but there are new industries that people could be retrained and to work in that would be far more beneficial to the planet and to everybody if people weren't so desperately trying to hang on to a past. I mean, even the "Make America Great Again." What I mean, that, you know, they just want to turn the clock back.
Well,
Uh,
Make America First was, or put, is it Make America First? No, just America First. Not, there's
yeah.
Make America Great and America First. America First was a KKK slogan.
Mm,
So one of the things, and I've written about this on Medium, that I want to point out is that for those people who think Donald Trump isn't racist and, oh, both sides are equal, and there've been untruths on both sides, and people still think this way, even after the insurrection. I think it's changing. But the place where I did a lot of research was into white supremacist dog whistling and this
Mm.
has not been featured much in the news. But like, for instance, Pepe the Frog. Have you seen Pepe the Frog? Do you know about Pepe the
No,
Frog?
I
Okay.
don't.
He's a cartoon character that's a frog that started
Mm.
out, was drawn by an artist who didn't intend its use to be anything but a frog.
Mhm.
And the white supremacist movement co-opted Pepe the Frog as one of their mascots.
Mm.
So during the election campaigning in 2016, Donald Trump Jr. was tweeting Pepe the Frog and tweeting authors of white supremacist books and novels. And then there are other more hidden things, like Donald Trump would sometimes tweet out 14 words, exactly 14 words. And I pulled up this Medium essay that I wrote, which you can find on Medium. It's called "Waking Up to Racism:
Mm.
Um, from Your House to the White House." And a friend of mine shared this information with me, and I went and did some research on it. I'm just looking at the essay right now so I can read out. So there's a phrase that's very famous. That is, it's a sentence. It's 14 words. So 14 becomes a very significant number for white supremacists. And it was a sentence that was first said by a white supremacist who died in jail, actually. And the sentence is, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children."
Mm.
Okay, so this is a very famous sentence. Now, what Trump would do is tweet out sentences that were exactly 14 words like this. And this has not been featured in the news, on the Department of Homeland Security website, it's not there anymore, but I have a screenshot of that site on my essay. Um, they put a sentence that is 14 words. "We must secure the border and build the wall to make America safe again."
Wow.
This was posted in February of 2018. The other dog whistle that the Trump and his team used a lot was 88, which is shorthand for Heil Hitler, because the eights look like H's.
Mm.
So it's a dog whistle. It's like a secret way to say Heil Hitler.
Mhm.
And if you looked at Trump's store where he was selling, he sells a lot of merch, Trump merch. They have a lot of items. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but a lot of items for exactly $88.
Wow.
And
Mhm.
and then finally, when he was campaigning, they developed a series of ads um, with a triangle that, I think, an upside down. I can't remember if it was a yellow triangle. I don't know if you saw this, but
Yeah, I did see that.
it was a Nazi symbol, right?
Mhm.
There's also an eagle that they use that's a symbol for the KKK. So they were using all this in campaign materials,
Mm.
and they put out exactly 88 ads on Facebook. Like, I don't know if they had, but the number 88 was significant in this campaign where they're using Nazi symbology. And then we also have, the QAnon conspiracy theory of drinking children's blood, uh,
Mhm.
and it gets into anti-Semitism. This is a very old anti-Semitic propaganda technique that was used by the Russians in the early 1900s and then reused by the Germans in the 1920s and 30s, saying that Jews were drinking children's blood and were cannibalizing children.
Mm.
So, I mean, for people who haven't been in the States, I don't know if Dell can say this, but I think she probably can. We have been in a shitstorm.
Yeah.
It's been like, what is going on? It's been insane. And one of the few people, I think, who's done research into the white supremacist business of Donald Trump. And it's horrifying. Who uses anti-Semitic, satanic ritual propaganda? And Trump always has plausible deniability, right? He can't say that he's created Q or that he does Q. But when asked about Q, okay, what would a normal president, a sane and kind president do? He would say, "This is not who I am, and this needs to stop, and you're not welcome here." But what
Yeah.
he said instead was, I think they're good Americans and I know they love me, and then we saw half the people at the Capitol had Q flags,
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to actually talk about that. I want to talk about the insurrection at the Capitol and the impeachment and the acquittal. So I'd love some of your views on that and well, basically, firstly, I'm of the viewpoint that we were left with no choice. We had to impeach, but I'd be curious, even if we knew the outcome, which was pretty tragic, that ears were closed and people, thankfully there were a few people that did listen and did pay attention and voted their conscience, not their party. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, we weren't surprised that a lot of the GOP, most of the GOP in the Senate voted to acquit. I was maybe surprised by McConnell's statements
Mm,
afterwards, saying that, Trump is guilty and we should try him outside of the Senate. But, as a lot of pundits have already said, he's been trying to play both sides. So, on the one hand, he voted to acquit to appease Trump supporters. And on the other hand, he's saying all this other stuff to try to move the party back toward, the centrist position. But the interesting thing is, Trumpists don't support centrism. And it's so funny how everything kind of plays into their worldview, because it's like these are establishment people, and Trump was the one who wanted to sort of break down the establishment. They thought for good purposes, right? But if you know Trump's history, you know that he's all about just sort of making money, and being in power. So that's why he would do anything at all, right? I was so disappointed and so saddened, but not surprised. I was happy that, with a few senators that I actually called their offices, who did vote to convict. And I think the main thing that I wanted was for them to invoke the punishment on Trump, that he couldn't run again, because
mm,
that would be really saying, look, you have no chance of running, and it quashes all of his personal political ambitions, although his children could run and other Trumpists
mm,
could run. But they missed that opportunity. And that was, for me, that threw us all under the bus. I mean, besides supporting the lie about the election, which,
mm,
the way that this whole presidency has gone down is like, any given month, there were several things that Trump did that we could have impeached him for 4 years, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we were about to impeach Nixon for having people break and enter into a Democratic,
mm,
headquarters in DC at the Watergate office complex. And we're not impeaching Trump because he lied about an election, for the whole year, and tried to undermine our very democracy, and then
mhm.
sent, on
And find the missing votes in Georgia. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. But you said something that made me, I'm how do we avoid this happening again? Because even if Trump doesn't run again, we do have his children who do have political aspirations, and there could be another Trump type. How do we avoid this moving forward?
Well, I mean, I try to look at the good news as much as possible. I'm sort of someone who's like, well, if there's a huge, bear in the corner, we should keep an eye on the bear, right? Like, what is
Yeah.
the bear doing? Because we don't want to get eaten by the bear or killed by the bear. And the bear is not gone. So we need to keep our eye on the bear, and I
Mhm.
apologize to all good bears out there for this analogy for them. But we need to keep our eye on the GOP, and we need to shut them down, because they have decided in the last 4 years that they care more about their own power than they do about American democracy. And that's very clear to me. You know, if American democracy is going to mean that more Black people vote and more young people vote and people like me vote, they don't want it. That's what they're saying, and so we have to fight for democracy. And so I think that on the one hand, I see the Republican Party having huge issues right now because they're locked between, Trumpists and then people who are appalled by Trump. People are leaving the party. It's not enough people, but there are a lot of people leaving the party altogether. A lot of Christians have left their fundamentalist churches. I'm
Mhm.
part of a group on Facebook that has maybe 40, 50,000 members called Christians Against Trump. And
Mhm.
people are horrified at what has happened in their churches and the experiences they personally have had. Even going back to Q and these conspiracy theories, like one man who they don't even know personally that they believe in because of their belief has created situations where family members aren't even talking to each other anymore, you know? Um,
Absolutely.
so I think what I would like to see is truth commissions that actually go into exposing QAnon, exposing the right wing propaganda machine. I'm happy to expose, there are some left wing sources that are also a little dubious, like I think the Palmer report. There's some that have been a little bit extreme, but we really haven't seen the kind of hatred and incitement to violence, that kind of hatred that we've seen on the right, which has been so terrifying.
Mhm.
We've seen political correctness. We've seen, some sort of very extreme examples of trying to not be racist, where it gets a little awkward and absurd. But that's way different than having a party in power that is supporting Nazi era conspiracy
Mhm.
theories. And so I think we need to expose all of that. I'm a supporter of, at this point in time, as much as I know about it, ending the filibuster so that we can move forward with campaign finance reform, House Resolution 1, which will be Senate Resolution 1, which will stop the GOP's capacity to do redistricting and to uh, suppress the black vote and the minority vote. So that's really important. House Resolution 1, Senate Resolution 1, and ending the filibuster so we can move forward because I don't think we owe the GOP anything anymore.
Mhm.
I have no sense of, oh, the poor GOP, let's include them. What I'm
Mhm.
interested in terms of unity and moving forward is that we can reach out to Trump supporters now if they're willing. If they're willing, I don't know if they are or who is, but I'm willing to try that here to talk about on this, show, Art of America,
Mhm.
talk about what do we agree on because there's a lot that they were saying, the inauthenticity of the media, the inauthenticity of the political elites, the corruption of the political class in the United States. Yes, the
Mhm.
left has been talking about these things for a long time, bringing real jobs back to the United States. The left were the group that was protesting the free trade deals. They were risking their lives to protest those deals. So
Mhm.
it seems to me that this racism thing and the anti-abortion thing have really gotten, and that's what the GOP has used to fracture us and to keep us separated. Um, and
Yeah.
then, yeah, I think so. I think we need to, and I think Biden actually is doing a good job. So I'm getting ready to start to focus on the positive. Uh,
Mhm.
but I also been like, let's make sure the bear is chained up.
As you were talking, it just occurred to me we didn't even get into the gun rights and that whole sector of the GOP, but that's probably for another conversation because we are sort of coming up on time. But I just wanted you to let's finish off with, we are part of a spiritual community. So what do you see as, spiritual Americans and actually, spiritual communities all around the world? What can we do to counter these sort of neo-fascist trends that are occurring worldwide, not just in America? So I'd love you to address that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because as much as I've been wanting to reach out to the other side, I've also been wanting to protect Black people, or gay people or transgender people who are attacked physically in this country for just being who they are, who are killed. So
Mhm.
it's like, how do you cross that divide? And I think it's actually on white people, and I will claim the white half of myself here, to reach out, because I don't think it should be on Black people. I think that if white people can figure out ways to reach out to other white people and try to begin to educate them. In fact, the rewilding, not, I'm sorry, not rewilding, but reimagining our spiritual community
Mhm,
project that Rohini and Julianne Amir Shazat are working on, I think is really important, because the underlying factor here seems to be racism. It's the one thing that sort of connects everything in a way, from the evangelical community even to QAnon and
mhm,
anti-Semitism. I'm not sure about the gun issue, but I have heard from journalists that, who've studied the issue, that we actually don't listen to each other on the gun issue, and that there are more gun owners who are interested in sane reform, but then who somehow get the message that all their guns will be taken away.
mhm,
Um, and then on this side, there are a bunch of liberals thinking that gun owners are all domestic terrorists.
mhm,
And so I think that my understanding is that there's room for some conversations. And I'd be happy to interview, you know, Second Amendment supporters on my show about that.
mhm.
That's what I'll be looking to do next. And what was the question again? Because I feel like I just went on.
No, that's okay. No, well, I'm glad you touched on it, and I'd love you to finish off talking about that. But we were talking about, as spiritual communities, not just in America, but worldwide, what we can do to counteract, like you said, the racism, the ignorance, the being spoon-fed misinformation, but from a spiritual perspective, because I think I've seen it on Facebook. I've seen a few people really sort of engage in, again, this isn't what we're about. We shouldn't be political. We shouldn't be making these statements.
Right.
So I'd love you to just, if we can wrap up on that, what you, as part of a spiritual community that grew up in a spiritual community, what your thoughts are on that. And I would love you to also mention this, the reimagining our spiritual communities that you're going to be a part of, because I think that's very important.
Thank you. So my take on spiritual communities, and not just the Three Principles community, but
Mhm.
churches and Buddhists and, all spiritual people, who are serious spiritual people who have done some work on themselves or looked at themselves and changed, however you want to phrase that. We have tremendous capacities that a lot of other people don't. We have the capacity to engage in dialogue without getting angry, and to understand that people, even white people in the deep south, or white people in rural America, or there are even Black Trump supporters, that they have, the reason they're supporting Trump is because they're in their separate reality, and this is what makes sense to them, and a lot of them are scared. And I can actually relate to the idea of, like, oh, this is my community, this is what I've always known in my life, and this is the kind of lifestyle I enjoy and I love. And now it feels threatened. It feels like my kids won't have this lifestyle. I don't know how to operate and be in a world that I don't understand. You know,
Mhm.
I don't understand transgendered people. I don't understand why Blacks are so unhappy right now. I don't understand why saying the Chinese flu is racist. A lot of people truly don't understand.
Mhm.
It would take, in my mind, actually white spiritual people to have those conversations in a way that's non-threatening, to help educate people to understand, what the real Black history, like in the documentary 13th, and the excellent book White Rage, to understand the indigenous history, the genocide, and to open their minds, and to help people see that opening your mind is an act of love, and it expands you, and you get to let go of fear and anger, which are very negative feelings, you know? and to actually be a bigger and better, you know, more love-filled human being.
Mhm.
So, actually, Julianne and I are working on a project called Human Unity. It's actually something that I started, and now she's joined on to help with, like, a conference that we're planning for this summer, that is about bringing people in from spiritual communities to think about how do we engage in these issues that are have suddenly become so important to all of us, and they were important to a lot of people, who are directly impacted, but suddenly we all can see now. Um, and vice versa, people who are very political could also use the spiritual support, the emotional spiritual support to not burn out, to not live in anger constantly, to enjoy their lives because we still only have one life.
Mhm.
Even with, I mean, one thing that I often say to people who are freaking out a lot is, you know what? It's like, there's nothing new under the sun. Things have been bad on this planet, and people have been hurting each other and killing each other and enslaving each other
Mm.
since the beginning, practically. I mean, there are some people who talk about matriarchal societies that weren't doing that kind of thing, but as as far as our history books tell us, it's always been bad. People have always been cruel, and that comes from, being attached to identity and looking for well-being out there in power, in money, and not understanding that well-being is inside of us. And
Yeah.
that's such a powerful piece of information, spiritual information to be able to share.
Mhm.
And I think that we can do that as spiritual people.
Yeah, no, I love what you're pointing to, and it's so true. I mean, my God, if we didn't have, this sort of outside in belief that everything on the outside is what's going to bring us happiness and contentment and security, and if we didn't have this scarcity consciousness, we wouldn't be so into sort of the isolationism, and it's all about me protecting what's mine, and the others out there that are coming to get it, take it from me. I mean, it seems to me that this understanding that we share, and love, I mean, love is the antidote to fear. You only fear what you don't understand, but if we can understand each other, then all there is love. So yeah, I think it's
Oh, no, go ahead. Did you want to
no, no,
finish?
no. I was going to say, I think it's very important to have this conversation, but please, I'd love you to wrap it up.
Well, one of the things I've sort of reluctantly been coming to a conclusion about is, one of the things that I tried to express in my social media and in my Medium essays over the last 4 years is it's okay to be angry. I saw a lot of spiritual people like, oh, we can't say anything about. I'm like, we can say whatever the hell we want about Donald Trump. Like this guy's a fascist. Let's just get that out there. And I've looked up the definition several times now to make
Mhm.
sure that I'm clear, because my view was, Hitler, we didn't learn about the concentration camps until after the war was over. But he was a fascist well before that. And so looking for those signs, paying attention and calling it out that's what I thought we learned about the Holocaust to do, not to wait until there are concentration camps set up, right?
Mhm.
So and I personally am angry because when the Kung Flu thing started happening, I saw Kellyanne Conway lie about that. It was a
Mhm.
bald-faced lie. They asked her, "We've heard the president is saying Kung Flu in the White House," and she said, "No, absolutely not. That's absurd." And the next thing we have him in Tulsa,
Mhm.
the site of the Tulsa massacre of Black people by white people, which wiped out like a whole neighborhood there on Juneteenth, which is a
Mhm.
celebration of freedom from slavery. That's when he chose to have his rally at Tulsa in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer. He
Mhm.
said, got his whole crowd to say the Kung Flu together, and I just thought, whoa. So I'm still,
Mm.
the Asian hate crime thing is still happening now with coronavirus happening. So it's been hard for me because it's like, let's get the bear locked up. Let's get the bear locked up. That's sort of how I feel. Like once the bear's locked up, then we can do the dialogue and the reaching out.
Mm,
The bear's still running around, everybody's in danger, right? So that seems like job one. And that's where I think we have a spiritual mythology about we only focus on the positive, you know.
mm,
Well,
yeah.
fire in the house, are you just gonna sit there and breathe in the smoke and say, "Oh, well, at least there's still some the windows open, there's a little fresh air."
Yeah.
Um, uh-oh, my dog's gonna hopefully not bark. Um, um, but, um, but what I'm seeing is that actually liberals for the most part, and not all liberals, because we do have a sense, of compassion. That's a lot of why people are liberals, because we have compassion for other races and other people and people who aren't like us. And because we grew up in a liberal environment, some of it's just happenstance. But I feel like we generally have more of that training in listening and reaching out and that mentality, and that we're probably going to have to do it. We're
Mm.
probably going to. I don't see the Trump supporters coming to us and saying, "Have you?" I don't know if maybe I'm just not seeing it. I haven't seen a lot of Trump supporters say, "Can I please understand the liberal point of view?"
Mm. Well, I certainly haven't come across it. On the contrary, I've experienced aggression.
Yeah,
But I agree with you. I think having a spiritual understanding does not mean that we do the spiritual bypass and that we put our head in our sands. And that anger that you talk about, for me, that's just energy that gets us moving in the right direction to take care of things that need to be taken care of.
yeah,
I mean, we don't need to sort of, charge do an insurrection, but we can certainly do what we can to create a different environment moving forward. And I'm hopeful too, but I know it takes work, and it's not just relaxing right now. I think the danger, just like Hitler was around well before. I think we need to be cautious of what's going on, even if it might be in the shadows right now, that it doesn't reemerge in a few years. So I think we need to really pay attention
yeah,
to what went behind what we've been dealing with for the last 4 years.
yeah, yeah.
Mm. All right. Well, this has been wonderful. I've learned a lot.
Thank you so much. It's been great to speak with someone who, I feel already resonates with a lot of this, and you've really contributed your time and your efforts. So thank you so much, Del.
Oh, my pleasure. Really looking forward to seeing it
Yeah,
when it's on YouTube.
yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much. And I will see you soon.
Okay, thank you.